Hey, welcome everyone to the ARCHICAD User Monthly Training webinar for August 2018. This is Eric Bobrow, and it's my pleasure to share another session with you and probably a few hundred other ARCHICAD users around the world. Let me know that you can hear me and that you can see my screen, and we'll get started. Let me know also where you're calling in from and maybe what the weather's like. So, hey, Brett from Queensland, Australia, and Lou from up the road, Northern California, and Tom from Vancouver, Dwight from Brantford. Hey, Buzz. Yeah, a bunch of Canada's Smoky up in, I guess, in BC, Ohio, Wales. Okay. Portland, Maui. Okay. Hey, Dean. Cornwall, Andy, Holland. F. Devine, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name. All right, so we are good. We have, I guess, close to 100 people on right now, and we're going to be, I'm sure, getting some more as the time goes on. And so you can see me and see my screen, so we'll get started. So this topic here is one that is near and dear to my heart because over the years, as I worked with ARCHICAD, I realized that templates were a very strong factor in terms of the success of ARCHICAD projects, meaning that if you paid attention to the template that you start a project with and you have it really well set up, that you can work faster, reduce issues and errors, just have higher quality and more consistency. So let's take a look at the concept of templates. I created this mind map here a while back, and I looked at it just yesterday and went, you know, still pretty good. I mean, there's obviously some tweaks that could be made, but overall, I think that it stands up well. So if we think about an ARCHICAD project file, we're describing a building that's either existing or most likely in design and going to be built. And we can divide it into two halves. There's a specific building that we're working on, and then there's the general structure of the program. I mean, we're using ARCHICAD, so that's sort of a given, and within ARCHICAD, there is a general structure. Now, in the building design, what makes this building unique? Well, the geometry, the shape and form of the 3D elements, and this is where you put in your creativity to solve the client's problems or needs or make a beautiful building. You fit the program requirements. So obviously you need to be creative and solve the basic program. Now, when you are designing the model, you're also, of course, annotating it with 2D elements, dimensions, text, labels, etc. You're making sure by producing sets of drawings that it's constructible and that you can get permitted for it, and the contractor or builder teams can do their work, and you know, you're going to be getting approvals, you're going to be getting bids. So all of this is the specific building. Now in ARCHICAD, the things that we rely on are, one part are the attributes and definitions. So when we are working, we're turning on and off different layers, and so that is not part of the building per se. It's just a way of controlling the visibility and the accessibility of different elements. You can lock layers, for example. You're creating composites or managing composites and complex profiles that define different wall types, etc. So these are things that you use in your project. You know, they're not necessarily specific to the project, although you might have some wall assemblies that are unique to this project. Building materials, fills, line types, and surfaces. In fact, I'm just going to update this. Let's see if I can do that here, because it used to be materials were the surfaces. I'm going to say building materials, surfaces, surfaces. Okay, fills and line types. All right. So those are parts of the attributes that you use routinely. And the same thing with your pen sets. How are you going to visualize it? It's common for people to work in color. during the design process on screen to be able to identify elements of different types. It's common to reset the pens in layouts for printing purposes so that construction elements are all solid black, etc. There are variations, but that's a common thing. In model view options, we're going to be looking at different ways of seeing the structure of the building. Schedules are, ways of reporting what's in the building. Window schedules, door schedules, appliance schedules, and other types of quantity takeoff lists. Now, inside the file, we have all sorts of relationships, which, as you become a sophisticated, literate, and let's say productive user of ARCHICAD, you come to understand it on a sort of native language basis. You have a project map and a view map, which can be confusing right at the beginning, but ultimately the views define project map viewpoints with specific context, certain layers, certain other settings like scale. The layout book, of course, defines your sheets. You're going to have source markers and that define viewpoints. So, you cut a section, this is a marker that actually is generating a viewpoint of the model. The views are ways of seeing those viewpoints with certain layers turned on and different scales, the drawings and layouts. So all of these things are interrelated. The favorites in the interactive legends are quick ways of getting access to common settings, parts that you need to put into the building. So if we think about it this way, whenever you create a new building, this is what you're working on. This part here, ideally, is fairly stable. Now, of course, over time, you're going to develop it, and you may come up with new ideas, and you may have different templates for different project types, like a commercial office building would be quite different than a single family residence, which might be quite different than, a master plan for a college campus or something like that. So different types of projects will have different templates, but basically the ideal workflow is to have a well-developed, robust template for your office for a particular project type, or maybe for all your projects. Now, what happens when it's not robust? What happens when you take the Graphisoft template and you don't do anything with it and just you start a project? Okay, well, if it's not robust, it may not have things set up for all of your needs. So let's say you're drawing a molding or some trim element, and you look and you say, well, what layer should I put this on? So if the template doesn't have layers for, let's say, everything that you might make, then you're going to struggle. You may say, oh, let me create a custom layer for that. Layer combinations, similarly, do you have layer combinations for every type of drawing? Do you have layer combinations for your working views? Like when you're working on the roofs and the gutters and things up in the upper part of the building, do you have a layer combination that turns on just the right elements for that? It's not that you have to have a layer combination, but if you do, it's much quicker to just sort of switch to that view or that layer combination and work on it. And certainly you need to have layer combinations for all the drawings. So if your template doesn't have all of that, then you're probably going to create layer combinations on the fly. From one project to another, they'll be different. The layer names will be different. It may be hard for you to figure out, where did I put that thing? If you're in an office with other people, maybe like, well, where did John do that? Or, I can't remember what we were doing on this project. So without a robust, clean, sophisticated template well suited for your office, you can waste time, you can have inconsistent results. The settings for elements might be different, so things might be thick or thin, or just different ways of representing them. And you're going to waste a lot of time. You even maybe have to redo your title block in the worst case scenario where you're just opening from the Graphisoft template. So these are some of the things that can be pitfalls if you don't have a well-developed template. Now let's look at, and actually before we go on here, by the way, are you seeing my webcam? It looks like Andy says no webcam here. All right, well, are you seeing me? Not critical, but I do like being on screen when we have these types of presentations. Okay, John says, I see your webcam. Roderick says, yes. Okay. Oh, by the way, I want to mention just what our overall structure is. I'm targeting 2 hours here. If you can't stay for the whole thing, that's no problem. It's being recorded and it'll be posted. I'm going to be spending the first hour myself presenting. We're going to be looking at the Graphisoft templates, sort of some of the developments that I've seen there. MasterTemplate, which is my own product that I developed with a partner, Scott Bulmer, who's an architect in Southern California, and have maintained and developed over a dozen years. We're going to be looking at Jared Banks' Shoegnome open template, which is a very cool free template to download that you can check out, and the BIM6x Power Template, which is another commercial template competing with MasterTemplate, and I think they've got some great ideas there. So we'll be taking a little look at each of those templates to see some of the differences, some of the cool ideas. After roughly an hour, I'm planning to switch gears and have Roderick Anderson, a longtime client, a very excellent award-winning architect from Costa Rica, will show some of his template. Now, he's done presentations before on his whole sort of how he approaches projects. I'm going to give him 20 minutes to show some of the cool things that are in the template. So just a quick overview. Then we'll have a special guest who I haven't worked with before named John Hallgarth. John is has a background in construction management, worked for one of the larger GCs in California, Swinnerton, for a long time, and has been developing his own template for construction management purposes and quantity takeoffs. So we'll give him a chance to share some of the things that he's done there. He and I may, in fact, collaborate on a course on quantity takeoffs and costing for ARCHICAD. He's working on a live in-person 2-day presentation on that, and I had already planned to have some online training for it. So we just started discussions about possibly working together on a project for online training. I'm going to reserve hopefully a few minutes at the end for Q&A, but feel free to type in questions as they come up, and where possible, I'll try to weave in the answers to them. Bob Schwenke says show off. So am I showing off my my beautiful coif here? All right. Okay, let's go on to the Graphisoft templates here. So I'm going to bring up. Actually, let me just see if I can do this. If I can do this magic thing, if I hide this and I hide that, voila. Okay, so what do we have here? We have ARCHICAD templates over several generations. These are US templates for 19, 20, 21, and 22. Now, this is going to be a short review of some of the things that Graphisoft has done and has been developing. So I thought it was sort of an interesting way to look at the concept of a template that keeps developing over time. So ARCHICAD 19 template is actually pretty similar to what was in the templates for many years, but it started to change as we went into 20 and beyond. So in the Graphisoft template, in the view map, we have basically just a couple of stories for floor plans, ceiling plans, some basic elevations. They haven't placed any sections or created any details in the template, figuring that, well, we don't know where the section marker belongs, so we're not going to create sections ahead of time. And there are just a handful of schedules defined in the project, a few 3D views pre-saved, a few things for DWG, and then there are some default views. Now, the default views is interesting. I wasn't aware that they had actually put this in until recently, but it is basically including clone folders. So some of you know this concept very well, some others not. But if I go into construction documentation here, and we look at section, let's say elevations here. So the symbol for the elevations is the elevation marker symbol as opposed to a general folder. And when I open this up, we've got the 4 elevations. There's some settings, the properties. Well, each elevation is going to be, in this case, 1/8 inch, and it's going to have a certain layer combination, a certain model view option. And if you were to create more elevations, or if you were to create some sections, you'll see that there are, if you were to create sections, basically these will have sort of common properties. So the defaults are clone folders that map the folders in your project map. The power of this in general is that if you add more sections, they're just going to show up in the view map, and they will have defined views that you can place onto your sheets. And as with any decent template, when you open up the project, there are a few sheets, or there are some sheets here with pre-placed drawings. So if I go to the elevation sheet here, and I apologize, this is rather small on screen here. Let's see. There we go. There's nothing drawn, but if I double click on this, you can see this is where the elevation would show up. So basically, when you draw your building, there's a view of it defined based on where the elevation marker is, and it would show up on the sheet. So that's a sort of a common standard for any type of template, is that you have some views defined already. You have the views pre-placed onto layout sheets, and so to some extent it automates the process. You just model, put in annotation, and it just shows up in the sheets. Now, if we look at the sheets here, there aren't a whole lot set up. I think Graphisoft has generally said we should not assume too much. Let's just put in a base, and people will add more to it. Now, if we look at the layer settings, you can see there's, I don't know, about a dozen different ones for common things like ceiling plan, sections, floor plan, each of them controlling the layers. So for any of you who are using ARCHICAD, all of this stuff is very familiar, but I want to contrast it to what happened in later versions of the Graphisoft template. So if I go to the 20 template, we go back to the views just to be able to compare them side by side, we'll see not much difference here in the 20 template, but there are, let's see, in the layout books, actually it's not a whole lot different in the 20 template, but where we start getting into some later ones here, let's say the 22 template, we'll see that they've got some schematic design views here. So they have basically a whole division between schematic design and design development and construction documentation, saying that, when you're doing schematic design, you're going to have fewer drawings in the set, and because you haven't started doing detailed design, and you may want to number them differently. So if I go to the SD1 cover sheet, let's see what this has here. So it says SD1, and if we go to the design development cover sheet here, we're going to have this here, G001. So we have different numbering things. So what Graphisoft has done is they've gotten gradually more sophisticated with adding more. No, actually, this is the USA template here. I intended to have this so where we could compare it to the international version as well. So there's lots to a template beyond, of course, just the views and the layout books, but I wanted to highlight how Graphisoft has gradually expanded the layout structure. They've also expanded the view structure to incorporate more different types of drawings. And if we look at the layer settings, you can see there's more of them. There's several here for 3D views, and some more specialized things like architectural code summary here, and BIM6x, IFC, some things that didn't exist before. So each of these are then different layer combinations, and they've also actually reworked layers here. Now they continue to have, A dash as a concept for architectural information, but they've now sort of coalesced all of the annotations into one group. Now, I like the idea of this. In fact, in MasterTemplate, we set this up a long time ago, and this is an important concept as for new and intermediate users to understand, is that if you're doing, let's say, an existing plan or something like that, there are some annotations you're going to put on those plans that won't show up on a demo plan, or won't show up on enlarged plans, or won't show up in the ceiling plan. Things that you put on the ceiling plan, likewise, whether they're text, labels, or dimensions, or certain types of fills, 2D stuff, that annotate, are specific to that plan. So the idea here is that regardless of what tool you're using, you can just say all of the 2D stuff in general are going to go there, whereas the 3D model elements are going to be put on layers that then gets selectively turned on or off based on what layer combination. So they got much more sophisticated with that. If we look though at schedules here, we'll see what do they have. Well, it's more. I think the earlier ones had about 5 schedules. Now they've got some more in here for variations. So it continues to develop. In the international version, interestingly, we have a rather different appearance for the markers, for like the elevation markers. There's no section markers pre-placed, which is like what we had before, whereas in the US one, you'll see on the plan view that they've actually placed 2 section markers going through the central area. So if you draw your building here, you'll at least have something to look at right away. This is for a wall section, and there's some other stuff for a north arrow and some other information down here. So what I'll just point out is that I wouldn't say that the international version is backwards or anything, but they just haven't developed the template structure like the US people have. You can see that the view map is very simple. There's no differentiation between, let's say, schematic design and design development. There's just a handful of views of each type, and then the default views that I was referring to are set up here at the top level as, in fact, that's how they have their elevations and their sections. And the layout book similarly is very, very minimal. Now, that being said, there are many things that are in the international version that are different and I like about the template. If we go to the pen sets, for example, there are pen sets for different scales. So when we're working at 1 to 100, which would be roughly an 1/8 inch in the US, there are certain settings here in terms of the pen weight. If we go to building plans 50, it's going to be somewhat different. It looks similar, but if you click on it, some of these are going to be different weights. When we go to detailing, you can see some of these have changed. So basically, they've got a whole lot of carefully defined pen sets for different uses. Now, interestingly, if we go here, 2D elements general, cut structural, cut non-structural, etc. Where we go here, annotation, this would be walls, curtain walls general, cut structural, cut non-structural. So these designations here, they do exist in the US version, but they've really only, in the US version, only the first 2 rows have designations, just as I recall, and other ones just are colors. And here, they followed a whole standard for, when you cut through beams, what pen should it be, etc. So I do like the pens and colors here. I've never gotten used to it, but I recognize that this probably will make it easier to get certain types of controls. All right, so we've looked briefly at Graphisoft's templates, and I'm just going to say they have a couple of constraints, a couple of issues that they have to balance. As we all have constraints. We want to do everything wonderfully and to the best of our ability or to the most complete fashion possible, but you have to think about communication. You might want to explain something in great detail, but the client can only understand the high-level summary. In the same way, Graphisoft has to balance between productivity, like creating a template that you use and you go, wow, everything's set up beautifully, and it just is so efficient. And they have to balance that against simplicity, where a new user or someone watching a demonstration can go, oh, that's very clear and very simple. I like how I can understand that. So to what extent should it be kept simple so that it's easy to understand and to sell, versus what extent should it be made robust, complex, sophisticated, so that for the expert, it works as well as possible. It's always that balancing act. And over the years, I think they've shifted a little bit more or moved in the US from having the simple version of the template that everybody has to add a bunch of stuff to having a more robust template that is more self-sufficient with less modification, and maybe a little bit more complicated when someone first looks at it. Well, let's look at MasterTemplate. Now I haven't opened that up. Let me just go here. We've got, in fact, let me just close up some of these things because we may need the memory space here. So it's interesting to see the what do you call it, the difference in the interface. You know, how the old version, which we were so used to, now seems ancient. You know, it just yeah. All right, so let's get rid of this one here. All right, so now I'm going to go into in ARCHICAD 22 here, and I'll open up copy of MasterTemplate. Now, let's see, I've been working on the new version. I've got a new version of MasterTemplate 22. We'll open this up. Let's see, I think that's probably the best one to do. We'll launch a new instance. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the motivation for MasterTemplate and the history of it. So I started selling ARCHICAD back in 1989, believe it or not, version 3.4. At the beginning, of course, I didn't know much about it. I had learned some CAD stuff. In fact, I'm not an architect. And the first times that I was being asked as a tech person to train someone, and they said, you know, how do you do a fascia? You know, and I went, can you explain what a fascia is? You know, and so gradually I got to learn, you know, the language and what things mean and how they fit together. But over the years, over the, you know, following 20 years as a reseller, I did a lot of training, and I realized that helping people with the best practices, the best ways of using ARCHICAD is just makes a big difference. You know, if you're working with the philosophy of ARCHICAD, with understanding the ways that ARCHICAD naturally wants you to put in information, you'll do better than if you come at it the other way. Like the classic thing was the AutoCAD user who came and said, I'm trying to do this and it doesn't look exactly like my graphic standards. And, you know, we'd have to say, well, it may not be exactly your graphic standards, but let's focus on the model, getting documentation that's readable, and then get the graphic standards closer, but accept some compromises because you're winning this whole big thing. So here with MasterTemplate, what happened was back in 2007, we were selling a lot of licenses of ARCHICAD, and there were a number of firms, mid-sized firms, at least for our office, you know, firms with 5, 10, 20 licenses that were getting started that year in 2007. And I had Scott Bulmer, who was working as a consultant and a trainer for me, develop templates, and we discussed as we went along, you know, sort of how to set up this company's template and how to set up that company's template. And, you know, as we were doing it, because there were several within a couple of months, I realized, you know what, we should really set up one base template and then just customize it from there. And from that idea, in the fall of 2007, I launched MasterTemplate as a product. And so it started being sold to US users. Then we created an international version and have continued to develop it from ARCHICAD 10 and 11 on up to today. Now, some of the principles that I'll say I always embrace, and I think this is just good sense for a template, is there should be a place for everything, and everything should be able to be in its place. So that means there's a layer for every purpose that you need. You might have some additional needs, but let's say in general, let's aim for that. Layer combinations, not just for drawings, but for also working phases. So in other words, and let me actually, I'll demonstrate while I talk. That'll be more interesting. So here we have MasterTemplate as a starting point. Is a tiny little sample building just to show how certain things work. We can also, there's some notes here that say, you know, what you're supposed to do. I'm just going to delete this one. Let's see if I go to the ungroup here or activate groups and say delete model, then I think I can just delete those elements here and just clear the space. All right, so that clears the space there. Now, so it's intended that you would also go and clear, actually clear the building, the sample building, but I may want to show you some schedules that come from this little sample building. But if we look at the layers, for example, you'll see one little thing we did at the time. Graphisoft had A-wall-EXTR, so very short layer abbreviations based on the AIA convention or the NC National CAD Standard Convention. And we said, let's make it longer. We don't have a limitation. Let's make it more readable. Let's put vertical separators for the names, just to make it readable. You can see that there's a huge number of layer combinations here. So condoc, all these construction documents. So these essentially are for each of the drawings that you're going to create as construction documents. But then there are a whole bunch of layers for model. So what does that mean? This is while you're modeling, when you want to see the building only, and you want to turn off the annotation, but you just want to see the building. Or what if you want to see it with the site? What if you want to see it with the SEO elements, the solid element operators, visible? What if you want to have a special mode where you're seeing through the roofs? So these are all different layer combinations for working phases. So that was a part of our philosophy there. And when I click on model, building, and site, you can see obviously it turns on and off different layers here, which are different than when we're in the floor plan. Now it's similar to sections, but it's not exactly the same because sections are going to have annotations. We also, over time, developed a bunch of C layers for civil, electrical, landscape, mechanical, plumbing, structural. Some people have said, hey, I do my own structural, and so wanted to develop that. Graphisoft generally avoids that, saying architects in general aren't doing structural, but it wasn't that hard to add in, at least enough for basic structural drawings. Now the U layers here are similar to those annotation layers I mentioned earlier, where anything that you want to put just on the roof plan or just on the ceiling plan is only shown on the reflected ceiling layer combination and some special purpose ones here. And similarly, the site plan one is only shown on the condoc site, right, etc. So those are the annotation. Then we have some special layer combinations for working with solid element operators and with creating objects. So without trying to prove anything, just say that we try to make sure that there were layers for everything and layer combinations not only for getting drawings out, but for different modeling purposes. Now, one of the things that I also started to work on was using worksheets. So worksheets, of course, can be any 2D information. We created different worksheets for different purposes. As you know, you can bring in drawings like a DWG file for the site plan here. You can also have things that might be a legend. So what is a legend? Well, in the simplest case, a legend is when you have a series of elements with text next to it saying this is this wall type, that's that wall type. So you can see visually what they are, or this is that type of receptacle or outlet or light fixture, etc. But an interactive legend, if I go here, what are these? This is basically a group of elements that we can show in the background behind or in conjunction while working on a section, and then I drop it and say we're going to put in some extra, put in some insulation or put in labels with specific text. So if you eyedrop a label and then you go click on the label tool, it'll have that already preset. So you can have some common things in here. So this is something for eyedropping, as opposed, so you interact with a legend as opposed to the ones that are that you're going to just place on the sheet. We also have things like the detailer library parts. So these are 2D parts that you can eyedrop when you're working on details. Now, we are doing more and more detailed modeling, so somewhat less need for these things, but there are definitely times when you just want to drop in, piece of steel or connector or insulation or, just different 2D elements, and these are ways to work with that. So the worksheets are a resource there. If we go through the view map, we decided early on that we would have a set of views for modeling and design, and then separately, with some variations for visualization, and then separately construction document views, and then down lower some presentation document views. So again, similar concept, just views for different phases of the work. You notice all these little shortcut arrows. These are the clone folders. So basically, anytime that you if you had a building that had 10 stories, the reflected ceiling plan would automatically expand to have all of those stories. So it has certain settings there. So I believe that clone folders generally are very powerful and very useful. And the same thing with, let's say, the details. This is a clone folder, and these are the standard details that we would just include as starting point there. But you're adding more details, they just show up here. The only thing you typically have to change is the scale. You know, this details this one scale, another detail at a different scale. Now, when we get into the layout book, one thing that you know, seemed to make sense at the time, and you know, I still think it makes quite a bit of sense, is to say we have different types of users. Some people are doing smaller projects and prefer to have just numerically organized sheets. In other words, 1 through 10 or 1 through 20 there. And so we have a set for small projects. And then some people are working on bigger projects, and therefore they want to have the A400 series for this and the A500 series for that. So we actually have both of them listed here, and the idea is that you would use whichever one is appropriate for your office or for that project, because maybe you have some projects that are using the small one and some that are using the large one. Now, of course, as you know, our ARCHICAD, you can customize this whenever you need it, but this is some of the things that we set up within the template, so it required less customization. Now, one of the key innovations that I had early on, in the sense of the figuring out a way to speed up work, is the interactive legends. So if I go to the interactive legends here, these are elements that are a kit of parts. Some people call it a boneyard here, and you can see they're grouped into different areas. If I zoom in on this area here, we can see a whole bunch of walls and slabs, and you can literally just go and you know, eyedrop this, and then you're ready to draw a wall of that type. Now, in the old days, favorites were very limited. You just had a text list, and it was hard to have a very long list because it just got very cumbersome. There was no way to organize them in folders, and you couldn't visualize them, so you couldn't see, you know, for example, what the wall actually would look like, or other types of elements that you want to just see before you choose it. So the interactive legends, again, were intended as a way to give quick access to favorite parts or commonly used parts. In addition, and this I actually picked up from a few different users and firms that had started to use it, and I thought this is a fantastic way to save time. And in general, I think it is a great way to do that. Here we have some rooms. Now, the idea here in this template is that we have some rooms that you could literally drag into your project and put into your design. You're going to want to change them. They're just initial things for you to work with, but it would be a quick way to throw in a kitchen into your residential design, or throw in an office or commercial restroom into another design. And once you see the concept of it, you can expand it in terms of creating your own quick rooms, as I call them, ones that are actually matching your standards, so that you have 3 different kitchen types that you do a lot. Just put them into this legend area, and then you can literally select them and copy and paste them over. And oh, okay, interesting. I just noticed Chip Hudson is one of the ARCHICAD veterans that has been a guest at on this series actually in May, and I did email him saying, hey, can you jump on and show your template? And he hadn't replied until I just see a few minutes ago. He said, I'm here and I can show off my template. So Chip, just let me know whether you can stay for the whole time or whether you have to run off, because if you have to run off, I'll try to put you on earlier rather than later. I know Roderick is on, and he's going to be showing his, and John Hallgarth. So that'll make 3 guest presenters, which will be great. All right, let me see what questions we have here. All right, so Jay says, isn't it more efficient to use the renovation filter to assign demo, existing, and new annotations than have additional layers? Yeah, just in general, I do recommend that because you then have layers for different elements, you know, walls or cabinets or furniture, and the elements have designations, so you can turn them on or off. But there are some special cases or some situations where you might want to what do you call it, have a layer for demo stuff. There, let's say that for certain things it can be useful, but in general I recommend the renovation filters for sure. Let's see, Jalot says, can you talk about story settings and calling out actual GIS elevations? What's the best process for setting the story levels? Okay, so of course I can't answer a lot of general questions here, but I think this is worth taking a moment. Go to the options menu, project preferences. We're talking about the project story levels. Now, we do have the story settings. So is it how many feet or meters between one story and the next? How many stories do we have? What are they named? But we also have the project location. And the project location includes the altitude above either sea level, or if you're in Australia, you might call it the, what is it, Australian Height Datum, AHD, something like that. Basically, it's a reference above that point in space. So when you say that your building is at 120 feet above sea level, then you can just say, well, the ground floor is 0, but if I ever want to see grade, I can use in the annotation, I can choose the reference to sea level. So the grading, you can say, or the contour lines can be referenced. So you want to set your altitude for your main reference point, commonly the top of finished floor of the ground floor, but it could be something like the grade right outside the front door, or any other convenient reference, but that's what you're going to set your altitude. And then when you're actually placing elevations or spot elevations, or you're setting things in terms of a mesh, you can choose whether you're referring to sea level elevations or you're referring to project level elevations. So in general, that's what we want to do, is have the project 0 be a convenient reference point, maybe on the ground floor, but have a defined relationship to your external datum point. Okay. All right. All right. So Doris says they've had problems with the interactive legend in iDrop. I'd be happy to help you if you send me an email to support@bobrow.com. I'd be happy to help you with that. Okay, and JS, the interactive template is on the first floor story. So, all right, this is an interesting challenge here. Before we leave MasterTemplate, I'll just explain this briefly. Some of you may understand it well, and others may find this mystifying, but you can put elements of any type on the floor plan. That means you can put, walls, other 3D elements, you can put 2D annotation. In a worksheet, you can only have 2D elements. So you can only have annotation, fills, text, lines. You can have objects that may have 3D information, but ARCHICAD is happy to just put the 2D version of the object in there. But you can't have walls, roofs, etc. What we did here was create a view of the interactive legends. Now this is in the floor plan, and if I select this element here, if I select this, if I can select it here, whoops, okay, it's all grouped. Let me just suspend groups. And if I select this, you can see this is a wall here. Okay, now if I go to the worksheet, the interactive legend worksheet, what we're going to see is the same information, just what we were looking at, but we are in a worksheet here. Now, how did we do this and why did we do it? Well, you can have a worksheet off on another screen. You can have a worksheet that you can just flip back and forth between the plan and the worksheet, keeping your place. You're working on the kitchen, you can jump to the worksheet back without having to move off to another part of the building. But I wanted to have things like walls, etc. here in the legend, and I didn't want to have to jump over to a different part of the plan. So this is a worksheet that has nothing in it, but it has a trace reference of that view. If I turn off the trace reference, it disappears. Turn it back on, it's there. So I cannot select anything here. If I try to, it'll say this element is inactive in this view. So it isn't there. It's just a reference, a visual reference. And but I can go and eyedrop. So I hold down the eyedrop shortcut option, and I can click on it, and it should pick up the settings. Let's see. So it is, you see it's picked up the settings. It won't allow me to, it won't show that I've got the wall tool, but it did pick up the settings of this interior, the interior wall that I was working on here. I guess this should be an exterior wall if I do this. Yeah, you can see it picked up the exterior. So basically you can eyedrop through the reference. Now the reference itself, just as a little trick, it looks natural. It looks like the original thing. That's because in the, let's see, it's under the trace and reference palette, I can choose to have the reference in the original color. Very commonly, we might make the reference just one color, you know, just something so we can see, ooh, that's terrible. Yeah, I mean, you might make the reference something that stands out against things, but I just said, let's show it in the original color. It looks natural, you can eyedrop it. All right, so that's MasterTemplate. Gone on just a tiny bit longer than I wanted for that. Version 22 will be coming out shortly. I have the first version of it out for release. I'm calling it Beta 1. It has no new features, but it does carry across. I'm going to be adding new features, and hopefully by the end of August we'll have that available. There will be an intro sale for that. If you check, maybe even later today, certainly by tomorrow, I'll have a sale on it, so you can get it for a cheaper price, at least through August, through the end of the month, a pre-release sale. I'm also going to be revamping videos and the manual for MasterTemplate in September, so it's all up to date. That's my plan. Okay, so that's MasterTemplate. Let's take a look at, and I know that there's some other question here. Has anyone used the template for another language, Spanish, etc.? I did create a version for Spanish at one point. Didn't have a whole lot of buyers, so we didn't keep it up. We do have a German version that's maintained by one of my partners, Joachim Suelo, based in Germany. And I guess it is possible to just take the template and translate it. You have to go through every name that you care about, like the layer names, etc. But there's nothing that says that you can't draw a wall and label it in your language, etc. So it is possible to do that. And if any of you, for some mysterious reason, want to work with me to create a version for the French market or something like that, let me know, because I'm always open to sharing the work more widely. Now let's look at Jared Banks' Shoegnome. So let's just see. I'm gonna go here. So that was scratching the surface on it. I just wanted to show a few things that were really useful and interesting. Let's see, we have, why am I not seeing it here? Okay, let me just, actually, let me open in ARCHICAD 21. He has not updated his Shoegnome template for 22. I'm sure there'll be some changes there, but so Jared, as many of you know, is a very well-experienced, expert veteran of ARCHICAD. He writes a whole lot, so he has a blog. He blogs and is published on Graphisoft's North America's site, and he also, creates video. He has a nice video channel on YouTube. Let's see. So here is Shoegnome Open Template. All right. Whoops. Okay, I have to find it because I've moved them around. Here. So this is Shoegnome Open Template. All right. So he provides this free of charge, so you can download it and play around with it. It, I think, has some really interesting features. Again, I'm only going to scratch the surface on this. Now, if you want to go deeper in templates than what we can do today is going to be a quick tour of a bunch of templates. Then you could sign up for my ARCHICAD Templates and Office Standards course. I'll post a link for that. It was actually created 2 years ago, and I did a whole session, like 90 minutes or 2 hours on Graphisoft templates, similar amount for MasterTemplate, similar amount for Shoegnome, and a similar amount for BIM6x. So there were 4 sessions, and I went into detail in each of those templates. So that is available. I'm going to put it on sale this month so that you can get it, for a lower price. All right. So what are some of the things that I like about what Jared has done? Well, we're in a view on his. It's a worksheet that he's set up here, and it says welcome, and it has some guidance on what to do. That's sort of cool. That's just in a worksheet. Now, if we're in the view map here, we go to project startup checklist. Here's another worksheet where he's basically saying, what should you do when you're working on a project? Well, you should update your template, make sure it's up to date, fill in project info. So one of the things I didn't look at in MasterTemplate, but Jared has a similar thing. If you go to File, Info, Project Info, there's a whole lot of information that you can put in here, and then you can reference it on your layout sheets or anywhere you need. And basically, if you put it in here, that information will show up where it's supposed to. So in a good template, you'll be referencing auto text as much as possible. Project previews is set these certain things up, set up your title block, set up your origin, etc. So, and he actually says to change this, if we select this, and right now it says foreground fill, and we change it to background fill. Foreground solid fill here. I don't know. Here, I'm going to make it black. So anyway, he's basically saying just change these settings, and you'll know that you've done it. I've gone through this much. I still have a few more things to do. I thought that was cool. Then he has a thing for delete all. So basically, he has a sample project here. It's a very small one. And in fact, I didn't mention that MasterTemplate has a more elaborate sample project where you can see all of the elements in context. And I think all 3 of our commercial templates, meaning my own, Shoegnome, and BIM6x, provide a bit of a sample project. I mean, Jared's is minimal. I think BIM6x is a very extensive one, and we provide with MasterTemplate an extensive one. And the idea is that you can then see how it's intended to be used. Now you go here, and it's basically saying just pick this view and then delete everything and start fresh. And in that view, we're going to see that most of the layers are visible and unlocked, but there may be some that are markers. All these markers here are hidden. So basically, you won't accidentally delete a marker. Now, why would you care about that? Because there are markers, remember, that define elevations and maybe some defining sections that are already pre-placed onto sheets. And while you'll always need to move them around depending on your project size and complexity, having them pre-placed on the sheets is a time saver. So in general, you don't want to delete the markers accidentally. You want to leave them, move them into the right position, etc. Now, so those are some interesting things. Now, there's a whole lot of good stuff here, but I'm going to show you one thing if we go to show zones in 3D. All right, so this is in his little sample project. And what are we seeing? So this is a zone that I guess is related to the site area. It is actually invisible forces. So what are invisible forces? For him, that's a way of describing the setback limits, the height limitations in some cases. So what are you allowed to do? And you want to make sure that your building doesn't, exceed that. And if you do exceed it, you can see it and either get an exception or, work around, rework the design here. Now, what is this? This is a zone. Actually, I'm sorry. No, this one is a morph. So it's basically probably he drew a shape on the plan as a morph and then extruded it up to whatever height was needed, and it's set up in a translucent appearance. Now, I'm going to go to the floor plan and look at a couple of things about the way he set up this model and about the way that he has some visualization overrides built in, which I thought were just really cool. So if I go and just cut through part of this model here, we'll just make it a a full multiple story thing, and then we'll go to 3D. All right, so here's this model here. Now, in the, let's see, is it this one? No, it's here. Okay, so these are the graphic overrides. So in version, what is it, 20, I think this was introduced. It allows you to change the way things are seen for different purposes. So here's an interesting one. We can say that I'd like to show a white model. All right, so now everything's white. Okay, so that's one way of doing a white model. There's another way in terms of the view menu, 3D view options and styles. You could change it to a white model. In fact, it doesn't have the white model in there, but this is one way to do it. But here's another one. We can say highlighted interior, exterior. All right, so these are interior structures, that's exterior, and on the plan you'd also see that. Or let's say highlighted structural. Okay, so if I zoom in, you see that this is non-structural. We're seeing through it, and the structural is the blue. And then notice here that the siding is non-structural there. A little hard to see in some cases, but overall you can tell what's structure and what's not. Now here's another one where we can say egress window check. Now what does that mean? It's basically going to put everything in a normal view, I suppose, but it's going to look at the windows and it's going to, based on, if I select the window and we look at the settings of it, is it a legal means of egress for emergency? And so how does it know that? I'm not sure it's, do we have that in here? Okay, there's all these different properties. I'm not quite sure where the egress thing is defined and if it's, or if it's something based on the size. Of course, you have to have it large enough there. But it's basically looking at the window and whether it's considered a legitimate thing. Let's just look at that, the criteria here. So if I go to the visualization, it says egress windows are green, non-egress windows are red, and so sometimes you may want to do that. Let's look at the rules, and this is set up in the template. So that means if you've got it in the template, you can easily just pull it up on any project. So what is an egress window? It says element type is window. Egress opening. Egress openings is yes. So this must be a property for that. So I'm not quite sure how that egress openings is defined, but basically the idea here is that you can check on things. So this is an interesting way to audit your model to see whether certain things are the way they should be. So he has some nice things there. Now, another thing that I really like is in this sample project, and it's certainly very minimal, but if we look, how did he do these elements? Well, this is the roof. Let's see, I should be able to, why is it not letting me select that? All right, so here's the roof. Here, actually, let me take a section through this because this is, I think it's easier to see in the sections here. Maybe this one. Okay, so here's a section similar to what we were looking at. Okay, if I select the roof here, you can see this is highlighted out to here. This part here is not the roof. If I click on it, it is another element here. So basically the main structural roof with insulation is only inside the building. This is another piece of roof. When I zoom in on it, this is a separate board. And then look here, what you may not notice is that this thin cover is an upper roof. So it says roof finish. So he basically has a main roof inside, a cover that extends over the whole top, and then he has an outer piece here and some additional pieces, you know, for covering the edges up. If we go to the wall type, we have this. Now, if I zoom in on the wall type, you notice that what's highlighted here is the structural wall and the interior cladding. But if I click on this element, that's a whole different element. This one is the finish for the wall. And if I look at the definition of it, let's say edit this. So this is just an interesting educational experience to say, well, what the heck is this? Well, if I zoom in on it, you'll see that it's siding, lap siding there, that will give a nice clean wall section, and it will also look in 3D. You'll see the lines that you would expect, and it's actually super tall, and then it just gets cut off by the roof. So so template is an opportunity in some cases to teach people how to do things. That's in terms of anything that's distributed, like from Jared Banks or BIM6x. It also can be an example just for your own office for how things are done. So those are a few of the things that impressed me with Jared's template. There are lots more things built in there. Let's switch gears now to BIM6x. So say open, and I'm in 21 now, so now I have to switch back to 22 here. So BIM6x is a company based, where are they? Somewhere in the Rocky Mountain areas. I don't know if they're Colorado or where. They are the ARCHICAD dealer for some of those Western states, and have a very talented team with Chris Clark, who I was a colleague with as a reseller for many years, Link Ellis, who I knew of and have had some contact with over the years as a veteran ARCHICAD user, and now he's, I guess, head of their technical services, or anyway, he's one of the main people creating things and supporting users and things. So here's the BIM, this library. Let me just go and get that library here. All right, we've got that, and we'll open this up. Now, Link is been creating some resources on the web here. Let's just bring this up. Where is my web browser? So Chrome. Here, bring this up. I guess I had hidden that there. And so he has created a series of BIM6 and the letter X.com. You can go there and check out what they've got. They're, let's say primarily focused on serving ARCHICAD users in their area and selling ARCHICAD, but they do have a template that they sell. They did actually develop a Revit plugin, so you can import Revit files and Revit objects, or at least Revit objects. I'm not sure about Revit files. He's written here, let's see, so there's a few missing library parts. We're going to ignore that. But he's written a whole series of articles about the power of why is this? This should open up. Power of a pre-linked ARCHICAD template. So if we scroll down here, actually, I guess, why is this not opening up? There it is. Okay, so this is actually a link. He just went into AEC Bytes, but I think some of them are on their blog as well. But you'll see that this is a very extensive article with a lot of information, and he's got several articles there about, talking about these things. So good reference. Let's just take a look at the template. And so some of the things that I noticed here. So we're in a worksheet that has a little welcome here, and it has some support information. Now, in terms of the project structure, we have 3 stories plus a roof and a foundation, so a little bit more elaborate than Graphisoft's. Look at the sections. A huge number of sections predefined. How do they manage this? Where do they put them, etc., like that? This is an interesting thing. If we go to the floor plan here, right now, if I turn off the trace and reference, which shows how a building might fit on the sheet, we actually have the 4 elevations, and then this is actually a section. You can just barely see the handles that's moved around the building. It's sort of like, instead of drawing it straight through, they're saying, let's keep it out of the working area, because you can always then straighten it out. You can make it non-jogged there. So there are a couple of sections in there, but those are the only ones that are visible. If, on the other hand, if I go to the layer combinations here, and I love their layer combinations and layer settings. They've got a really clear setup, and it covers, I would say, most of the same stuff that we have in MasterTemplate, maybe a little bit cleaner and more elegant. Doesn't have everything. I mean, obviously, we have some things that they haven't decided to put in and vice versa. But here's an interesting thing. If I go to the markers pending, so what does that mean? If I turn on the pending one and unlock it here, and then fit in window, we're going to see all of these things over to the side. Now, each one of these is a section marker. Each one of these is an elevation marker. Each one of these is another elevation or section marker for a wall section. And then these, I believe, are groups for interior elevations. So these all exist, and the methodology they've got here is that they're on this layer called pending, so they'll be hidden most of the time. You need to just move them into position, the ones that you want, and then change the layer to, the appropriate marker, whichever one it is. I guess I manually turn this on, but you would normally just have access to these ones that are currently hidden here. So you would change that. So what does that allow them to do? Well, in the layout book, they've got all of these pre-loaded, meaning that all of these elevations are sitting in the layout book area. They've got views defined for them, etc. So in theory, I mean, I think if you use it properly, it is a great time saver to have them. How many do you need? I don't know. Certainly, it was not much problem for them to create a bunch of them and just say use what you need. If you only need a handful, that's fine. Okay, so here are all of these, and you would rename them. Or, you just go with A, B, C, D, but you could rename them. In a similar way, you'll see that if we go to details, look at this. It goes on and on and on and on and on. Now, they're divided in terms of the view map, in terms of details. If this is on construction documentation, we go to details. We've got live details, standard details, and 3D details. I like that. So obviously some details literally are cut from the model, and in the general case, you're maintaining the detail consistent with the model and you're adding some annotation to it. Others are standard details that you may use in multiple projects. You import, or you actually have them live in your template, and others can be 3D views. Now in the live details, they've got them grouped into different scales: 1/2 inch, 3/4, etc. And look at what each one is called. Please name me. 1/2 inch live detail 1, 2, 3, etc. So basically, these detail views are defined so that you can have as many details as you need, and certainly some projects will have a ton of them. And they exist. The markers exist in a place, the worksheet. Where is it? Worksheets, and we have detail markers. So I go here. And what do we have here? So it's basically saying cut these details. So these details, if I zoom out, there's a whole lot of them defined for different scales, that you're going to refer to them. And it says basically you want to cut it when you're going to use it. So here's detail 01 in here. You're going to cut it, you're going to paste it where you want, and then move it to say, I'm going to do an eave detail, or I'm going to do a foundation detail, and then change it from right now it's, well, it is a source marker, but when you paste it in, you're going to want to make it a source marker again. So then it basically will define a new view. So the idea here is that they've defined a whole lot of markers. You cut and paste, change the settings, resize it, etc. Now it exists, and it potentially would be in the layout book, ready for you to move onto the right sheet. So some interesting things. I'm not quite sure how it works in practice. Sometimes, just as a general observation, you put in a whole lot of stuff. If it's not used, it may just get in the way. Maybe this is just perfect. It stays out of the way, you never see it except when you need it. So, but I think that they've done a lot of excellent work with that. They've done excellent work with the layer combinations and that. And they've got here, I think, a very, very clean set of layouts divided into marketing, schematic design, 2 different sizes for construction documents, and an issue register, which is literally just one sheet, I guess, that you would say what issues have come out. But within the marketing set, there are just a few things. So there are some floor plans, there is a cover sheet, etc. And then if we go down to schematic design, we have, you know, the cover sheet and the existing plans, demolition plans, etc. It starts getting a little bit more. And as we get into the other sets, we've got design, development, and construction document here, and each one of these has more. So we start having just a ton of, you know, different sheets set up for all of these things. And one of the things that they've done, which we've done in MasterTemplate as well, is to have a place where you say, I'm not using this. Instead of deleting it, you can just move it in there, and then you basically, you can exclude it from the list of sheets. So before we go on, I mean, right now I'm about 10 minutes over where I wanted to be for this point, but basically we've got Graphisoft's templates, which are included with ARCHICAD, that have gotten gradually more sophisticated and, you know, I think cover more ground, but generally you need to add things to them quite a bit. You have 3 different templates that we've seen here that you could say are more complete, just certainly more extensive, take advantage more of ARCHICAD's structure. We haven't even talked about some of the favorites. You know, they've got a whole extensive set of favorites. In MasterTemplate, you saw the interactive legends, which are essentially another way of doing favorites. You're always going to need to customize things, but I think any of these 3 templates will certainly get you further along if you wanted, you know, to start with one of them. Link said that if I wanted to offer a discount for BIM6x, that he would be happy to do that. So if any of you want to get BIM6x's template, you can email me and I will give you a discount code. So at least through the end of August, I think. So you can do that. And I'm also going to be sending out a note. They're doing a training in Cabo San Luca, I think down in Mexico, ARCHICAD on the beach. In I think it's the end of October, if I'm not mistaken. So good people, like what they do. Now let's move on to some live presentations from other people. Let me get Roderick set up, or let me just see first of all if anybody else is. Okay, so Roderick will go on to next, and then let's say. Since Chip, you came in last, if you can stay on, I'm going to do John Hallgarth next, and then Chip at the end, if that's okay. And just let me know if we have to change that. So let me go here and find Roderick, and make you a panelist here, and then I'm going to make Roderick a presenter. Hey, Roderick.
Hey, Eric. How's everything going?
Good, good. So you can bring up your screen. Let me just give you the 30-second intro. I've worked with Roderick for quite a few years. He bought his ARCHICAD through his sister who lived in the Los Angeles area, but he's been based in Costa Rica. So it's sort of a little bit under the table because wasn't supposed to sell to Costa Rica, but I sold it to his sister not knowing that, and he went off and of course used it where he lived. But that did allow us to get acquainted. Roderick went through some of my training courses and became an expert through all of the work that he did to optimize his projects. And I became aware as he started to share some of his project questions and examples with me that he was a fantastic designer doing amazing work. So about 3 years ago, we had Roderick present at the Masters of ARCHICAD Summit to show his work. He also had Roderick present a course on BIM6x. Roderick does design build. So in Costa Rica, that's an asset when you're working with luxury homes and clients from the US and other places, because they just might prefer and certainly find it more convenient to say, I'll work with you for design and you're going to handle the construction perfect. I don't have to manage another separate entity. So Roderick also demonstrated in February on this series, the ARCHICAD User series, some fantastic tropical homes and a resort that you've been working on in the Dominican Republic. So Roderick, welcome.
Well, thank you. That was a very comprehensive introduction.
All right. So so you've shown some projects before, and we'll certainly want to look at a project or two. But the question today is, what do you put into your template that's pretty special, unusual, useful? You know, what are some cool things you've done there?
Okay, well, let me give that some thought in the sense of what's different. Maybe one of the things, and I know that I had touched on this subject before. I believe on my original Masters of ARCHICAD presentation back then, and it's pretty unusual, is the application of color. And so we all kind of have grown into the use of color just because the original Graphisoft template sort of comes that way. And I'm sure that every new ARCHICAD user just starts working from that. But in my specific case, let's say the one thing that's kind of different is how we apply color. Let me sort of get rid of this thing here. How we apply color once things are on the layouts. So if I show you an example, for example, let me see. This will be just a floor plan. Okay, so this will be a good one. Okay, so just a general floor plan view. Most people that I've seen tend to end up going to the all black. And I have stayed away from that when BIM6x was originally introduced. And the reason why I changed it was the introduction of BIM6x, because I realized that by using BIM6x, you're not holding a large sheet of drawings in your hand where you have the peripheral vision that, I mean, it's natural to the human eye, but you're looking at a little part of the drawing on a tiny screen. So therefore, the application of color helps us identify what is what and not confuse a line that represents something from the building from an annotation from, let's say, a structural grid line or even a section line. So, of course, I've standardized this, and it's very simple. It's through the use of the, let's see, of my pen sets. So I've just standardized it from the pen sets. Now, of course, this is something that I've sort of dragged on from an old application. I think BIM6x started in ARCHICAD 17. So back then, we didn't have the graphic overrides. Nowadays, you could do this through setting up graphic overrides. So instead of needing to have multiple pen sets to do different things, you could think about doing it through the graphic overrides. However, even though you could, I think it's one of those things that even though you can, it doesn't mean you have to. And with ARCHICAD, you're sort of faced with that kind of question all the time once you start perfecting your application of ARCHICAD, because graphic overrides are very powerful for many other things. So if you start also applying that with the graphic overrides, then maybe your graphic overrides list can start becoming too large. So this is one different application. Of course, my template is a very large structure. So let me actually here show my organizer. And some of you may find this a little bit different. Of course, since I'm in Costa Rica, I end up using the Spanish version of ARCHICAD. I used the US version for many years, but it just made my life simpler for annotation and some of the stuff on the schedules that I couldn't correct from English on the US version. So I do have, in a similar fashion to what you showed on the newest ARCHICAD 22 template, that now there's a schematic design and construction development sections here. I basically apply the same thing, and I've done this for many years. So I have a section for my schematic design phase with some 3D views included, set up as part of that, and maybe some cameras. Of course, this starts growing as you start designing the project and so forth. And then, of course, a few clone folders for conceptual plans, design plans, and maybe some zone plans. So on this particular project, this may not come out too well because this one that I'm showing was actually merged into a new version of our template once we were completed with schematic design, and then we were starting with the drawing development. But actually, it shows up pretty good. So let's say this could be a good example of how our presentation of a floor plan and schematic design looks, where we have color and we have the background color for some of the fills, for the cover fills. And if I were to say, all right, how does this look when we actually print it or when we generate a PDF, I just end up applying a different pen set, which turns a lot of the stuff to black and just leaves the colors that correspond to those cover fills, those left on with the color and maybe with, for example, some of the annotations and that kind of thing. So that's one of the things that I've preset into the template. Whereas if I go here to a view from the construction stage of the project, so let's say I may end up going to just the same architectural floor plan, then it looks different because here for construction drawings purposes, then I don't want all the color. I want something a little bit cleaner, a little bit starker. Oh, sorry, selected the wrong one. Oh, actually worked. Okay, so that's the right pen set for that. So that'll be how it shows up when we actually grab this view and put it on a layout. In a similar way, for example, if I just open up a section, then this will look like a typical section that we may be working on already at the start of construction development or construction drawings development. So you see it has a lot more detail already into it, a few tags here and there associated to some of the doors. We're starting to develop some of the details. And I'm showing here a project that's in current progress at the office. And if I were to just go to one of the sections, or actually just show this with the, let me see, with my sections for schematic design. And yeah, this and the graphic overrides. Oh no, this is good. Oh no, I forgot. This will not work, and the reason why it won't work is because in my template, I end up having, through the layers, I end up having separate section and elevation markers for both the schematic design and the construction drawings phase. So if we go here to, let's say, my structure of layers, which you'll find some similarities to your master template because this is where I sort of inspired it back then. Then here I have a section for all my annotation stuff. And here I have a subsection here for my markers. So if I look here for the sections for schematic design and just turn that on. So they're going to show up over here. I mean, right now they have no sense being over there because, as I said, this project we merged into a new evolution of the template, but they're different markers. So these have solar shading turned on, and maybe what I can do is just grab one of these, reserve it, and I'll just place it into the same place where we were looking at the other section. That way we can see sort of like the quick comparison. I'll just stretch this out. Okay, this is...
So one of the things that any good template will have, I'll just comment while you're doing that, getting it ready, is that if your settings are right, when you draw a new element, when you place a new section, when you bring up a view, it will automatically have the right settings. Now, of course, you know, there are going to be confusions like pasting something in from one project to another, etc. But in general, what Roderick is, you know, bringing up the fact is that if he has a section that's designed for a certain purpose, like the schematic representation, it's going to come up with the information appropriate for that. He doesn't have to manually go and necessarily turn on and off layers, etc. So you've got, for example, furniture in there for this presentation type of section, as opposed to construction section.
Yeah, so I've got furniture in here. I've got colors turned on for my Victorial hatching, so that, hey, it's more client friendly. Just for the purpose of the presentation, the client will be able to understand the project much clearer than from the other one. If we switch back to the construction one that I was looking at, and forgive me here for taking some time on this, but I usually don't work with the multiple tabs because I feel that they start taking a lot of memory away and starts slowing us down. Let me just find S10 was the correct one. So if we compare that to the construction section one, and I go to the same S10 that was going through the same place, then again, we'll see a much different representation, and it's still the same model, of course. I mean, there's differences in layers, there are differences in model view options, there's differences in graphic overrides, and so forth. Another thing that we've worked through the years a lot on our template is the incorporation of favorites. So we've got a very, very extensive structure here of favorites for pretty much everything that we need. So we got favorites for doors and windows, favorites for many different types of walls, or at least I should say not the most common types, but the most common systems. And I'll explain on this in a minute. Structural elements such as columns, beams, and so forth. Then I've got a subgroup with some subfolders here. It's kind of a little difficult to bring everything up. Okay, so for example, on my slabs section, I've got a subsection of slabs that I use for schematic design. And then I've got another section that I may use for final drawings. And the reason why I do this, and again, these are just strategies that we all may use. So on the ones that I use for schematic design, they're specific composites that have more stuff in them. So it makes my life easy. I start modeling quickly, where I can have my finished floor, my structural floor, maybe the base and the sub base, or if it's something for a second story, they may have on a single composite. I may have the airspace for the AC ducting and the ceiling for the lower level, but it's all on a single slab. And as I start developing the design, then I may gravitate to just changing those composites, taking away some of that those extra layers, and then modeling those independently. But as I start modeling, then I can have that reference. In a similar fashion, for example, and one of the strategies, let's say, and this could be something that you could call one of my different applications, is if we zoom in here, let's say you might see that this is a subfloor, and this is actually the structural floor, and I've got another slab on top, which is my finished floor. But when I'm doing my schematic design, I will only do one. And one of the things that's different is the application of these favorites. If I were to let me just make sure I don't mess up something on my project here. There we go. So if I just select one of these favorites, you'll notice that I have selected as a preset on the favorites, I have selected the reference plane on the top of the core, not on the top of the finished floor. And the reason for this is that once we navigate onto construction drawings development, you can simply change the composite of this to one of the ones that we have on the final plans, which then have the reference line on the top of the core also. But the difference is that I've set these up at, in this case, minus 0.045, and of course everything's preset on the template, so that the walls go down to where the structural slab is supposed to be. So when we start modeling a schematic design, I've already planning ahead to when I navigate the project over to a more detailed phase, and I don't need to be adjusting the level of my walls or the height, because everything's preset. So on all of my walls and slabs, everything's preset so that they can easily sort of convert into a more detailed phase later. Of course, there's lots of things that we have. One of the things that's valuable all the time is...
So we're gonna need to move on. Let's see if you can do like 3 more minutes and then we can move on. I know there's a lot you could cover, but pick a 1 or 2 more things.
Okay. Maybe a couple of more things that is interesting is, again, with the application of graphic overrides. And again, you can set this up previously and organize it nicely on the template. And one of the things that's cool that we do is we do these reflected ceiling plans, but we do 2 types of reflected ceiling plans. We have type of ceiling plans, and then we have lighting reflected ceiling plans. So in this particular one, it's just a normal reflected ceiling plan. And what I have is a graphic override pre-programmed into the template that, based on the composite of the ceiling, then it represented in a different color. Therefore, we have a differentiation of what's normal gyprock and what's maybe a wood ceiling, and maybe a ceiling, a cement-based ceiling board. And of course, I've got, as part of my favorites, I've got all of these auto text labels completely preset that we just apply via favorite.
So let's just focus in on that for a moment. Are those labels pulling information from the element, or are they just copy and paste text that you've got in a label?
No, they're pulling information from the element.
Okay, so just show where that comes from. So if you double click on that text.
So you see, what I've got here is, this is a text that's written, and this is pulling the ID from that roof. Then I've got a text here that says height from the floor, and this is pulling up the information of the level of that roof. I model all my ceilings with roofs, by the way. And then I've got a text here that says area, and then this is pulling in the information of that, and a ceiling type, and this is pulling information from a property. So of course, we've got pre-programmed the properties, and this is pulling in from the property.
So can you select that element, the not the label, but the actual element, and show where those settings are in the properties?
Let's see, so it's this one. So here under the properties for that particular one. So of course, here's the ID that's being reported. Let me just move this so that you can see it. So this ID is the one that's being reported right here. And then the code for the ceiling type is a property that's been defined here in the project. So that's pulling in here. And the rest of the information is just pulled in from the model. So if I raise this ceiling a little bit, and let me just demonstrate that. I know that this is a separate ceiling, which is the one that's being marked. So let's say I raise that by 30 centimeters. So immediately this will change to 3 meters instead of the 2.7 that was being shown a minute ago. So it's pulling live information from the model.
Okay, and then a final question here, just in terms of your working style. You've gone over this with me before, but you are using the roof tool instead of the slab tool for these ceilings. Can you just explain briefly why you've settled on that convention?
There's 2 reasons why I've settled on that convention, and let me just find a sheet here, plantas, here. This will likely represent it. The reason why is twofold. Number one is that during the design process, let's say as I'm modeling the project, then of course we're tweaking stuff and changing the design, and maybe I'll make a decision. No, I want this ceiling to be flat, or I want this ceiling to be sloped, depending on the design itself. By having it done with roofs, I can just put a 0 slope to a roof and have it be a flat ceiling. So it allows me to play with the slope of the ceiling without having to erase it and model it again. And the second, and maybe the most important feature is, for example, here I've got a schedule that's already put into the layout. And again, we haven't detailed this. That's why you see this sort of empty for now, because we haven't put in the properties on many of these ceiling elements yet. But by having everything be the single modeling element, then everything populates together. Whereas before, when I used to model the flat ceilings with slabs and the sloped ceilings with roofs, then when I would report everything on a schedule, ARCHICAD would separate it into 2 blocks. And that wouldn't make much sense, because you would have to read some information on the top of the schedule and then another set of information on the bottom of the schedule. And it wouldn't make sense, because you want this sort of to flow with the zones as you move through the home. So that's the other reason why it's changed on that strategy, to sort of make this more logical.
Right. Okay. Well, Roderick, thank you for taking some time today to share this. Due to time pressures, we're going to have John step up, even though I'm sure you could go on for quite a while more. For anyone who wants to see just Roderick's work, you want to just give your website address?
Sure. Everybody can check in at www.sarco, S-A-R-C-O. So it's sarcoarchitects.com.
So, and if you can't find it, just email me and I'll make sure you have the right spelling. SARCO architects.com. And if you're a member of the ARCHICAD user community, a supporting member with the silver membership, you can watch Roderick's presentation from February. That's in our reference library, where he actually shows some really lovely projects, of course, based on the template, but really focused on the architecture in that case. So John, welcome. I wanted to just give a 30-second intro here. Just got to know John. He volunteered to say, hey, I have a template that some people might be interested in seeing. We had a talk last night, and I thought, yeah, this is great. Let me just make you presenter so you can bring up your screen. So John, I know your background is in construction, and you've been using ARCHICAD for quite a while, and you've developed a whole template and a whole approach to construction management and quantity reporting. So tell us about what you're doing and about this template.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for having me on. You can hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. I definitely come from the commercial construction side of the industry, and worked in for one of the largest GCs here in California, and for almost 10 years I was using ARCHICAD as really my go-to tool for not only just modeling, but also for bringing together all different types of content. So I kind of came up with an idea of how to, thinking about what a construction management template might look like a few years ago, and then I kind of set out on the path of trying to build what was, in my opinion, and at the time, something that was kind of missing and that I hadn't seen before. So a few years later, I've developed this template that really has a lot of functionality built in that is really intended for the commercial GC and design build firms out there. And so after we talked yesterday, I did go through and I put together just a few slides that I think might help kind of situate people and get them into the mindset of what is a GC template. So you can see my PowerPoint right now?
Yep, we can.
Okay, Perfect. Well, I thought I'd run through this just real quickly, and then we can maybe look at a little bit of the template and also, maybe a quick example of the template in action. So yeah, essentially what it is that I'm doing is I'm building construction templates, specifically for ARCHICAD. I'm calling this whole template ContraBIM because it's kind of a contractor's BIM approach, and it's totally a major resistance to what a lot of the firms out there in commercial construction are doing. A lot of the guys, unfortunately, have gone down the path of working in Revit, and I think they just don't quite understand the potential of ARCHICAD. So that's one of my main goals with this whole concept, is to show people the power of ARCHICAD and how it can really be used for benefit by not only GCs and subcontractors, but everybody that works in AEC. So anyway, I put together just like a real quick concept here of how I view most templates for architects and engineers might fit together. And really the whole purpose, I think, is to try to get quickly through drafting and modeling, to quickly have predefined views of the pre-saved views that are pre-linked to layouts, with the purpose of ultimately getting to the point where you're publishing your drawings out as quickly and efficiently as possible. I think that's really the overall goal of a template for a designer. But obviously for GCs, we are not necessarily doing design, and so that comes to the question of what is the end goal of a template for a general contractor, and really why is it needed and what is included in it, because from my perspective, it's a totally different use of ARCHICAD, and it's a totally different mentality of how to use the tools and the reporting mechanisms within the system itself. So I put together this quick little diagram. Hopefully it's not too much there to understand, but on the left here is essentially the design teams, in the center general contractor, and then on the right is the trade. So what I wanted to point out with this is essentially just kind of looking at relationships. So certainly with the architects, I mean, they're managing the sub consultants, and this isn't every single project, but a lot of the projects flow like this, and then packaging things up and providing that to a general contractor. And certainly a general contractor has a lot of relationships, certainly with architects and the other design consultants, but there's also the entire other side of the fence, which is relationships with all the sub trades, which in commercial construction is a really important relationship to have. And there's a lot of back and forth of documents on both sides of the fence here. So with this kind of mentality in mind, you can kind of see how the GC really sits in that central role. And at this point, this is kind of where I start thinking about, okay, what does a GC need in this central role? And with that, kind of really start itemizing what the specific roles and responsibilities are for the GC. So certainly some of the first things are going to be performing design reviews, performing quantity takeoffs, assembling estimates, doing constructability reviews, scheduling, bidding, procurement. All of these are typical responsibilities and tasks that take place during pre-construction. On the other side, as we get ready for construction, we have more coordination. We're getting submittals and doing more field planning, planning the quality control plans for how we're going to validate that the work is being put into place correctly, how we're going to plan for different safety measures, and then as we get towards the end of the project, how we're going to start commissioning equipment and wrapping up the contents of the model for facilities management. So I think this diagram, my whole purpose here was to really show that there's a lot of relationships there. And for each individual player, whether you're on the design team or on the subcontractor team, really all of those different players have a certain part of each of these different responsibilities that I've listed there in orange, that light orange. So this is kind of how I've framed what should go into a GC template and what is important for a contractor to perform efficiently. So it's all the things that I'm trying to build into the template for construction. Really how I set it up, certainly ARCHICAD is the main tool that's part of this equation, but there's the whole document exchange side of the scenario, which is all about how we're taking PDFs from Bluebeam, because as a contractor, the first file format we're always going to receive majority of the time anyway, is going to be that PDF format. So for reviewing design documents when you're chasing a job, early on in pre-construction, when you're receiving submittals from your subcontractors, when you're marking things up, when you're looking at revisions, when you're documenting different changes, ARCHICAD and Bluebeam work really well together. And in commercial construction, Bluebeam is certainly widely used, and so there's a lot of power here just between ARCHICAD and Bluebeam. So that's kind of one of the main features of the way that I've set up my template, is for importing content through PDF format into the model, and being able to work with it. The other side is the data exchange side. So I think, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges in commercial construction, I think one of the biggest reasons not as many people have really been able to adapt to BIM technology and roll it out, is that it's just been tough for people to interact with the data. And so that's why I'm leaning on Excel heavily in this scenario, is to be able to take estimators, superintendents, project managers, all the different roles on a construction team, and being able for them to actually access the data and do so through the tools that they already know, trust, and understand how to use, which is, in this case, Excel and Bluebeam. So this kind of makes up the core function of the construction template that I've developed. And yeah, with that, the whole purpose here is really, if I could sum it up, it's all about content management. So it's all about linking together your bid contract documents, your design models, whether it's in a Revit format or early SketchUp formats or through IFC, bringing together your design backgrounds, which are typically in a CAD format, 2D DWG format, or trade coordination drawings in a 2D DWG format, and really just being able to bring all this stuff together, located into your project, into the coordinates, and placed onto views. And then, to me, the most powerful tool in ARCHICAD is the virtual trace and reference feature, because that, to me, is a way that you can systematically approach your the way that you review different design disciplines against other design disciplines, or shop drawings against design disciplines, or shop drawings against shop drawings. And it's kind of the baseline for setting up composite views that can really be used and super impactful for coordination. Moving on a little bit more to the reporting side of it, because as a contractor, there's so many different types of reports that are really essential to how you plan and manage a project. There's really two main ways that I approach reporting, and two main sources, which are from drawing views and then from model elements. So from drawing views, there's a number of different things we can produce that really help us plan the process, such as design schedules, design review schedules, estimate schedules, who's doing the estimating, who's doing the modeling for the takeoffs, and then on the other side, the field side of who's tracking submittals, who's running coordination, and so on. So there's a lot of things that we can report for construction purposes just using paper space, and the beauty of this is you can do all of this up front without having to have really anything on there. Oh, flash flood warning. Sorry about that. Yeah, and then on the other side, model elements, again, for design intent and field intent. And this is really where the data comes in, where we can start using elements for producing quantity takeoffs, assembling those into bid packages, creating different reports for tracking procurement, production, and then a number of other different reports also. So the whole goal here is really to use the model data as kind of a central repository that has links to all these different reports for trying to connect all the different roles. So with that, I think I can jump over and maybe just do a real quick run through of how I set up my template. I think hopefully that provides a kind of a brief overview of the mentality behind a construction-based template. So real quickly, I'll just show you how I set up. This is, Eric, you referred to it earlier as a boneyard, and that's what we were talking about yesterday. And this is essentially how I set up my baseline template. So when I break off a new project, I'll just essentially go through and delete all this stuff out. So I'm working with the base attributes. But essentially the way that I organize my model favorites is all based on CSI format. And so as you can see here, as I go through this, I have just kind of my standard model elements for all different types of systems. And, really for every single trade of construction, it's been definitely a lengthy process, but it's been it's a really interesting process of going through and doing research on all these different types of systems and how they apply to different projects. It's been, yeah, pretty interesting. So yeah, for each different trade, I have all these kind of favorites set up. So that's one, part of it for if I am doing modeling within the system. But I do have just kind of a standard layout for, applying views to a new project. But maybe I'll just run through really quickly here just how I set up my view map, because I think there's a lot of, this is kind of the overview right here. So as I mentioned before, I do a lot of just linking together of external resources. In most cases, it starts out as being PDFs, and then it kind of moves on to DWGs when you maybe get signed on. And then ultimately you want to get, IFC models to bring design content into your project. But essentially I set this up as just kind of a way of having a landing space for bringing all different types of content into the model. If we take a real quick look at my layers here, I have all of these reference layers that are essentially set up for all the different design disciplines. And my extension here is, noting DWG or PDF. And so this is all intended to be 2D content coming through. And so again, this is just a location where all that content can be placed, and then that kind of kicks off the next step of performing reviews against, architectural against structural against mechanical, and so on. So kind of the next level here is essentially my modeling views, which is if I'm modeling trades myself, it'll be based off these views. And so these are set up based on uniformat structure here. And so depending on what system I'm modeling, I'll be referencing into my different design documents and using that as a trace reference to really build the model from. And also this is kind of a way of producing different types of coordination views. So for like MEP coordination, I have different composite plans where it's linking up, all different types of distribution for MEPs. I might have an isolated one for MEP penetrations if that's critical to the project. And if I even need to go to the level of detail of having hanger coordination, then I can have all those on specific views. So yeah, so the modeling views, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think most
can you bring up a few of these views that are just show that? I mean, I know this is not a fully developed project, but do we have anything visually?
Yeah, this is just a blank. That was just the virtual library, so there is no project there. But under, say, like in a parking structure view here, if I go into my substructure foundations, and go to this foundations view, and of course, see the filtered content for all those foundations. And in this case, I think we actually saw there the some of the labels that I had on here turned off. But yeah, so these are just essentially views and layouts that have kind of different combinations of different information here. You can see here under my the views settings here. Let me see. So my layer combinations are really kind of based off a combination of different uniformat systems. So I think everyone's somewhat familiar with the A for substructure, B for superstructure, C for interiors, and so on. So I like having these kind of combinations based off of different system assemblies, and each project's a little bit different depending on what you want to see, but those are the ones I use mostly for modeling. I also have other layer combinations for different logistical plans, layer combinations, as I mentioned before, for different reference views, and then I also have a number of different layer combinations for breaking out specifics related to kind of the next level here, which is for trade views and shop drawings. So, as I mentioned earlier, this whole template is really meant to be a way to kind of merge your design content with your shop drawing content.
Yeah, no, it's fairly clear there. I'm just wanted to see if there were any other views that you could just bring up just in this particular small example that would.
Yeah, there's probably some views here. This is certainly not a fully detailed out view, but and I think a lot of them here are actually views just still left to the side. But certainly there's views in this case along each grid line. So just different views of the model that are set up and ready to be annotated really for the purpose of, understanding the details and the final configuration of the model before you go to the field to build it. So
now you have a bunch of data that you were showing me yesterday that show up in quantity takeoffs and go out to Excel, and I think that'll be, since we're running up to the hour, I think that would be an important thing to include, because it is so much more extensive than the typical architect is driving.
Sure. So in this particular project here, this is obviously a parking structure. Under my reports here, I have several different types of general reports that I create. One of the big ones is certainly trade quantities. So for each and every one of kind of those groupings of model favorites that I have, they're all set up, pre-reported and ready to go. So once you start modeling with those elements, they have the basic data associated with them to be showing up on the right report. And so for an example here, this is it's running a report now on the concrete of this project. And let me make that a little bigger. So essentially here I'm organizing things by home story. What's nice about this is you can switch this all around and organize it by uniformat, or there's a number of different ways of cutting this all up. But from here, all these reports are kind of set up and ready to go with an Excel estimate template that I've developed. And so this is actually the template that I've set up based off my the virtual library that we had pulled up there. So maybe let me just show you this real quick. Let me jump back to the library file. So if we open this up, again for concrete, these are all my model favorites. So there's certain data that's just built into the project structure. There's other data that I'm using based on the properties. So in this case, this is breaking out essentially different packages for whether if I want this element to be associated with the building versus site work versus different phases of a project. So just a way of separating costs into different bins. Under having a type of element, how it's being drawn is really important, because this is kind of a key indicator in my formulas in Excel for understanding whether I need to go grab wall values, beam values, column values, or and so on. I have a lot of additional details here for different resource buildups, whether it's material pricing, labor pricing, all that. So yeah, there's a ton of data associated here. And what's nice about this is all set up and pre-linked to my Excel estimate template here. So all I have to do is essentially just refresh, and it's really a live link where you would just to go around full circle here, you would just go to the publisher and then go to whatever report you're working on and just simply publish it. So say if I wanted to change this one to 400 in this case, just publish the selected items. This should all work. And then, it's as simple as that to just refresh. And then everything here is pulling from the other side. So something didn't work right there.
I think it was the third one down that you changed. It wasn't the top one, I don't think.
Oh, on my. Oh,
but you exported the one that was.
Yeah, this might be pointing to a different folder, because essentially in my estimate template here, it's pointing to one specific file here, and then this is essentially just loading in all the different data sources from the particular project. So I can see there's something there. It's not publishing to the right folder, so I'd have to just probably reset that in my publisher.
Okay. So you have one thing that as you bring up on screen, there was looked like a 3D view of something. Is that one of the projects you're working on that you can show us, or?
Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just an example of kind of a combination of different things. So it's actually, this would be a Revit file, kind of with a combination of additional content that I've laid on top of it. So, taking the base Revit file, and then in some cases I've added additional textures. And then as we were just looking at, there's, building up the site and building up the different plans that are used to really communicate to the clients and to the project team how exactly things are going to be built in sequence logistically. So
well, this is fantastic. This is really where we can see how you're bringing in stuff, and just by having it carefully set up, you can look at the information that's needed, or just slice and dice and view things in different ways.
yeah,
That's
this would
fantastic.
be graphic override of structural upgrades. This is it's a historic project downtown LA, and so you can see here just through this filtered view, upgrades to foundations, new shear walls, new rooftop structure. So yeah, I mean, there's this is actually one from a while ago. But what's cool about this is just the fact that if we start dialing in here, we can actually pull up specific views of the Revit model itself. And because of this structure in this template, there's a lot that we can do with just taking that Revit model, which is actually produced from an as-built, and going through and assigning the demoed layers and looking at where they're going to actually have to break off, demo specific beams to create new openings through holes and stuff for, new stairwells and all that. So it's just a way of starting to connect different types of content. In this case, Revit versus PDFs, and using that as a way of reviewing the content and finding the issues, and trying to project where there might be some things we need to work out. So
okay, that's a great place to finish up. Let's see if there's some questions while we do that. Just bring up your information about your upcoming workshop if you have
Sure.
that hand.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, then John at 3D Constructor is my email. But I do have a few workshops coming up. I've actually just scheduled the first three. The first one's going to be in Seattle, September 5th and 6th. The next week I'll do one in Los Angeles, and the following week in Dallas. And so these workshops are all about that ARCHICAD to Excel cost estimating workflow. And so it's going to be kind of a really unique way of just really diving deep into the details of these different procedures, and understanding what is really important to look at when you're trying to extract data from your project. So so yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting. There's going to be a lot of additional, this is something that I want to take and kind of replicate in all the different markets, and use it as a way of getting people introduced to some of this deeper potential of using ARCHICAD, and also to show contractors and subs out there that, hey, there's this tool, it's called ARCHICAD, it's been around forever, and to me it's the most powerful tool for a contractor, just in terms of ability to review content, bring it all together, and then really analyze it. So
if someone wants more information about the 2-day workshop or to sign up, do you have a web URL?
Yeah, you can just search on Eventbrite. That's where it's all listed. Or if you go to
ARCHICAD for cost estimating.
Yeah, if you search ARCHICAD, all three of them will pop up. Or if you go to ContraBIM.com, I have all the details on there, and links to
ContraBIM.com. Okay.
Yep.
So there are a few questions here. So Scott says, is the use of Excel due to a lack of capabilities within ARCHICAD, or for sharing data with non-ARCHICAD subs?
So I originally developed this workflow starting in really version 20, when they started adding properties, even before that in 19 with IFC. But it's really a way of being able to work with other people outside of the model. So it's not necessarily a lack of functionality within ARCHICAD, especially with expression-based properties. Now we can actually do more and more calculation within ARCHICAD itself without ever having to leave. But from my approach, or in my opinion, in order to get estimators and other people involved, they need to work in a format that they're comfortable with, because it's not realistic for everybody to always be in the model to go there for the data. It's better to have things published on a regular basis and let people work with it in the format that they're most comfortable. Okay.
Well, one tech question is, obviously in Excel you can reference from one file to another, and you could have costing, current cost of steel or concrete or whatever, or certain equipment in a separate document or multiple documents. Can ARCHICAD reference outside itself to pull in that data, or do you have to import it manually into the files?
So the workflow I'd like to use is, well, for my base cost, I'd like to use the library file that we were looking at as just kind of my average. But on each project is going to be different. in terms of the specifics and the difficulty in location. There's a lot of union versus non-union. There's a lot of factors that go into a project. So after you've modeled the scope, I always recommend publishing out to using the property exchange import export functionality, and then you can send that out in a format that you can send to an estimator, or you can send to a potential bidder and have them go through and update based off the latest available information they have based on unit pricing. And so you can delegate that out to the people that are really specialists in those particular trades. And then of course you can import that back in and continue working with that
right.
As the project progresses.
Excellent. All right, another question from Dan says, are you basically mimicking Navisworks using ARCHICAD, and if so, what are the advantages?
So no, I'm not mimicking Navisworks. A lot of the reviews that are built into this type of template is meant to actually happen before you ever get to a modeling point. I think one of the biggest wastes of time in this industry is people who model first without doing some sort of pre-coordination. So Navis is, to me, it's a much more powerful tool for bringing together big file types. Like if you're doing a high-rise building in ARCHICAD, I wouldn't want to bring in all my mechanical and HVAC, plumbing, fire protection, coordination models into my live ARCHICAD file, just because it would start weighing things down way too much. And you need to be in a quick iteration when you're there to try to check things off at the end of the day, signing things off in a composite type model. But for bringing in and doing like pre-coordination, such as just essentially looking at the runs, overlaying the design documents, doing single lines to kind of plan out the paths and elevations of the different systems and looking at penetrations, you can do that in a accelerated format using ARCHICAD, and then kind of have a pre-coordination effort with your team before you release them to go ahead and start detailing, which then to validate that after the fact, I would bring that into Navisworks or BIM6x or Celebri or one of the others and just do a validation at that point, and not try to avoid just going through the whole clash process without that pre-coordination process.
Okay, appreciate that perspective. So let's see some other comments. So Craig says, thank you for another excellent learning session. Dennis says, are these webinars? Yes, this is using GoToWebinar, and it's a web seminar. So I'm not quite sure what the question is. This is live right at the moment, but of course, when later on it'll be a video on a web page because we're recording it. Jalot says, is it possible to create some sort of script that can be run to update the publisher paths so they do not have to be manually updated every time you create a new project? It's interesting. I know, publisher will say where files are being saved. I haven't looked at, the issue of when you're saving multiple files and how you simplify that. So there is the, browsing here. This seems to be a manual process. In other words, you're browsing for a folder, and if you do have a lot of individual files to set the path, then you would, I don't see a script for that. Some cases you're just exporting one file. It's a PDF with 10 or 100 sheets, therefore updating the path is not a big deal. But okay. Now, Dennis says, why is ARCHICAD better than Revit? Oh boy, that's a big question, and don't have a simple answer for that. All right,
the short answer I'd say is for a contractor is simply because you can drag and drop PDFs. To me, that's like that's always been the biggest distinguisher for me, because if you can't bring a PDF into Revit, then it's
interesting. Okay,
then you can't start a project really.
So that's certainly one factor. Of course, tomorrow they could change that, but I'm sure there are other things. I mean, very briefly, the things that I'm at least have felt over the years is that Revit, or say ARCHICAD, is more graphically oriented, so you can just visually in 3D views, perspective views, make changes much more easily. In Revit, often you have to go into dialog boxes and things like changing the size of a window. You may have to create a whole new family of windows to be able to do that, as opposed to just stretch it to say, oh, let me line it up with this. Those are some of the things. Revit has some advantages in terms of things moving with each other, or you can say this is attached to that, and when I move this, it changes. sometimes that can bite you because things can, lock up because there's conflicting changes, or you make one change and it affects other things inadvertently. With ARCHICAD, I would say you have more control over what things you want to link and what you don't. But those are just some thoughts that may or may not be, clear. I think having a Mac version is a big advantage for many of us. All right, Andy says, that was excellent, John, great skills. So there you go, compliment. Now, I had hoped for Chip Hudson to present as well. He wrote in, or someone from his office wrote in saying that he had to step away from the office suddenly. So unfortunately, we won't have him today. So we are at the little over the 2-hour mark, which is sort of my target for these things. I want to thank all of you for joining me, and thank you, John. Thank you, Roderick, who also had to step away. This will be posted on the ARCHICAD user website and on my YouTube channel probably within the next day or a couple of days, and stay up on the ARCHICAD user site for about a month till the next one. And then it'll go into the reference library. If you want to have access to the full reference library of past recordings, you can sign up as a silver member and just pay a small monthly fee to support my work and keep this going. So in terms of follow-up things, obviously John's got some workshops. If you're really interested in getting quantity takeoffs dialed in, certainly it's something to consider. A 2-day investment of your time may give you everything you need. I'm going to be creating some type of a training on quantities and costs, possibly working with John, and haven't really decided the scope of it and how it'll be structured, but I'm aiming for October. And some of the things I think may be different is that John is going into high detail that is, let's say, relevant for certain types of firms. And what I want to do is make sure we have the low and medium level detail that's sort of easier to set up, but gives you really valuable, useful information. And so, that'll be at least a focus to say, what are the things you can do to get, well, I'm just going to call it the 80-20, to get a lot of the benefit with a small amount of work, as opposed to all the benefit with, all the work. So we'll see, but I think with the new formulas, it becomes much more possible to do things. Of course, Excel still, is going to give you more controls, and that's why, John uses that. Other follow-up things, MasterTemplate, as I said, is being updated. I've been working closely with another architect, Michael Boreski from Winnipeg, to update that. It's just was a whole lot of changes in Graphisoft's, at least in the US template, for the attributes. In other words, like the naming of the fills, surfaces, building materials, all were changed by Graphisoft. And one of my key principles each year is to say, all right, let me just make sure you have everything Graphisoft has with the same names, works the same way, plus a bunch more. So it's required quite a bit of work to coordinate all of that. So, but I'm going to aim to have that out towards the end of August with some new features, including the complex profiles with more editable hotspots, taking advantage of that feature there, more favorites related to, let's say, the curtain walls and other things. And what else is sort of new in there? Well, certainly the formulas, certainly some things related to the formulas and quantities will be built in. So the MasterTemplate will be on sale, pre-release sale through at least the end of August. You can check out actemplate.com, and I will be revamping training. So that's the template. That's John's workshop. We'll be announcing, well, let's just say I'm going to aim to have a plan either with or without John for what I'm doing on this. Aim to announce that maybe by early September. So John, you and I will talk and see whether we can work something out. Other stuff, next month's ARCHICAD user will be, probably 4 weeks from now. I haven't looked at the date. If you have any suggestions, requests for format, most of the sessions, well, all the sessions through May, we're interviewing one veteran user and looking at their projects. June, we had 3 of us with Andreas Lettner and Tim Ball from Europe sharing some of their work and the Masters of ARCHICAD Advanced Best Practices program. In July, we had a project checkup where we took volunteers to send in projects and look at them. That was very interesting, although we had some tech issues, so it was frustrating. But we certainly could do that again. And then, I want to have John back for a more detailed exposition on quantities and stuff, maybe later in the fall, maybe October, November, somewhere in there. And maybe looking at a project like, I loved that project that you brought up just at the end, the Revit retro, the one that was being rebuilt, because that's where we really see it in context. I think all of us are so visual, just to see you flip, not just all these little tables, but see the building. Okay, here's the scaffolding. That was great.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. So let's see if there are any final questions or comments. All right, so Dean says, thanks very much. Too much info. All right, lots of thank yous. Great presentations today. Brilliant, as usual. Better than fantastic. Thanks to you, Lou. Thanks, well done. So much really great presentation. John's approach is very interesting. That's from Eric Reinhardt. So, and thank you from Italy. I don't know your name because it keeps saying waiting for name there. So anyway, and Bob, okay, you sent your BIM6x file. I did get that. I'll get back in touch with you. So Bob Schwenke, longtime ARCHICAD user, actually longer than me, and there aren't that many who started in the 80s. But he actually started, I think, right at the beginning when it was first sold in the US. And he said he had a BIM6x file that he thought was interesting in context with Google Earth. So I'm going to probably take a look at that and see if we can get some interesting video tutorial on something from it. So thank you. I will look at that. Joe Archibald points out Revit doesn't work on a Mac. Yes, that's why those of us who are Mac users wouldn't even consider Revit. Anyway, more thank yous. All right, it's a wrap. Thank you, John. Thank you all.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, take care.